Proposals for universal background checks would require almost all firearms transactions in the United States to be recorded and go through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, closing what is sometimes called the private sale loophole. In a 2017 survey, a panel of 32 scholars of criminology, public health, and law rated universal background checks as the most effective policy to prevent gun deaths, ranking it number 1 of 29 possible gun-related policies. Universal background checks enjoy high levels of public support. A 2016 representative survey found 86% of U.S. registered voters supported the measure. Background. Currently, federal law requires background checks, through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, only for guns sold through licensed firearm dealers, which account for 78% of all gun sales in the United States. This data is according to a study by the original author that found the 40% of firearms were transferred, this includes both sale and inheritance, done in 1994, but once updated in February 2017 found that of 1,613 adult gun owners, only 22% purchased a firearm through a private sale. The current federal law allows people not engaged in the business of selling firearms to sell firearms without a license or records. The Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, CSGV, states that the National Instant Criminal Background Check System has prevented over 2 million convicted felons and other prohibited persons from purchasing firearms. According to the CSGV, the law also has a prohibitive effect, that deters illegal purchases. In November 1998, President Bill Clinton directed the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury and the U.S. Attorney General, AG, to provide recommendations concerning the fact that 25% or more of sellers at gun shows are not required to run background checks on potential buyers. This was called the Gun Show Loophole 3,12:27. 2 months later, Gun Shows, Brady Checks and Crime Gun Traces was released. The Secretary and the AG made 7 recommendations, including expanding the definition of gun show, and reviewing the definition of engaged in the business. After the Columbine High School massacre in April 1999, gun shows and background checks became a focus of national debate. In May, the executive vice president of the National Rifle Association, NRA, told the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime, "We think it is reasonable to provide mandatory, instant criminal background checks for every sale at every gun show." 118 Those concerned about the shows believed they were a source of illegally trafficked firearms. Efforts to reverse a key feature of the Firearm Owners Protection Act, FOPA, by requiring criminal background checks and purchase records on private sales at gun shows, which had become prolific in the U.S. since the law's passage in 1986, were unsuccessful. Private sale loophole. In the August 5, 2010, issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, researchers Garen J. Wintemute, Anthony A. Braga, and David M. Kennedy, wrote that gun shows account for only a fraction of all U.S. gun sales and that a more effective strategy would be to make all private party gun sales go through the screening and record-keeping processes that FFL dealers are required to do. Their report concluded, drawbacks with respect to expense and inconvenience notwithstanding, 83% of self-reported gun owners and 87% of the general population endorsed regulation for all private party gun sales in a 2008 poll that was conducted for the advocacy organization Mayors Against Illegal Guns. Gun owners gave stronger support to this all-inclusive approach than to a gun show-only proposal in a 2009 poll conducted for the same organization. Either proposal would face tough sledding on Capitol Hill. It would therefore seem preferable to move forward with the version that is most likely to reduce the rates of firearm-related violence. Following the December 14, 2012, Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre, there were numerous calls for universal background checks, to close what is now referred to as the private sale loophole. In an essay published in 2013, Wintemute said that comprehensive background checks that included private sales would result in a simple, fair framework for retail firearms commerce. 103 In February 2014, Researchers at the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research reported that after the 2007 repeal in Missouri of a long-standing law that required all handgun buyers to pass a background check, there was a 23% increase in firearms homicides. In 2017, a study by researchers from Northeastern University and the Harvard School of Public Health showed that 22% of American gun owners who had obtained a gun in the previous 2 years did not undergo a background check before doing so. Public support and opposition. Universal background checks enjoy high levels of public support. A 2016 representative survey found 86% of U.S. registered voters supported the measure. 5 national polls conducted in 2015 show high levels of support for expanded background checks for gun purchases, with rates varying, 93% and 89% support in 2 Quinnipiac University surveys, 92% support in a CBS/New York Times survey, 86% support in a Gallup survey, 85% support in a Pew Research Center survey. A 2015 survey found that more than 90% of Americans supported universal background checks, and that, on average, Americans thought they would be more effective than any other gun policy. There is evidence that many Americans incorrectly think that universal background checks are required by federal law. A 2016 survey found that 41% of Americans believed this to be the case. The same survey found that 77% of Americans supported universal background checks, while only 53% supported stricter gun laws. Based on this data, the authors concluded that this difference might be attributable to poor awareness of the limitations of existing laws. Those who oppose universal background checks argue that existing gun laws are sufficient, that the government does not prosecute enough of the attempted buyers who are turned away by the current system, that background checks are an invasion of privacy, that transfer might be defined too broadly. Opponents also maintain that universal background checks would not stop crime and assert that the only way to properly enforce a universal system would be to require a registration database. Gun rights advocate and author John Lott argues that universal background checks prevent poorer Americans from acquiring guns. Lott said that, as of December 2015, background checks added an effective cost of $80, New York, $60, Washington State, or $200, Washington, D.C., to transferring a firearm. Lott argues that universal background checks are an effective tax on guns and can prevent less affluent Americans from purchasing them, and that this disproportionately affects poor minorities who live in high-crime urban areas. Effectiveness. In a 2017 survey, a panel of 32 scholars of criminology, public health, and law rated universal background checks as the most effective policy to prevent gun deaths, ranking it number 1 of 29 possible gun-related policies. Research demonstrates that background check laws are effective in decreasing gun homicides and suicides. A 2015 study published in the American Journal of Public Health found that a Connecticut law, enacted in 1995, requiring handgun buyers to undergo a background check, in order to obtain a required permit, was associated with a 40% decline in gun homicides and a 15% drop in suicides during the law's first 10 years in effect. A 2014 study published in the Journal of Urban Health found that the 2007 repeal of a permit to purchase handgun law in Missouri, including the repeal of a background check requirement, was associated with a 23% increase in the firearm homicide rate and a 15% increase in the murder rate, translating to increases of between 55 and 63 homicides per year in Missouri. The study controlled for other variables that might affect homicides, including changes in rates of unemployment, poverty, incarceration, burglary, law enforcement officers per capita, and the presence of 4 other types of state laws. Implications for mental health counseling. Universal background check laws, which require that a background check be conducted before any gun transfer, may apply to temporary removals of guns from the home of suicidal individuals. Some clinicians have reported that these laws have created confusion about whether a gun transfer would be legal, and therefore made it more difficult for them to counsel their patients. States with universal background check laws. Currently 8 U.S. states and the District of Columbia have extended the background check requirement beyond federal law to at least some private sales. 8 states, plus the District of Columbia, universally prohibit any transfer of a firearm without a background check: California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Washington State. 2 states universally prohibit any transfer of a handgun only without a background check: Maryland, Pennsylvania. 4 states require the buyer to pass a background check in order to obtain a permit required for buying a firearm: Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, and New Jersey. 4 states require the buyer to pass a background check in order to obtain a permit required for buying a handgun only: Iowa, Michigan, Nebraska, and North Carolina.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.